We have Rogan from the Auburn Bee Lab on here, and we're going to talk about the results from some studies he did on my bees a few days ago. So, Rogan, could you take just a minute, introduce yourself, and kind of talk about your study?
Yeah, thanks for having me back, Bruce. I'm Rogan Tokash. I'm a PhD student at the Auburn Bee Lab, and one of the things that I'm researching is really Amitraz resistance. And so I was fortunate to be able to receive a grant from ADAI, Alabama Department of Agriculture and Industries. And through that grant, I'm actually going around and doing some Amitraz resistance sampling on Alabama beekeepers, and we're trying to determine the levels of Amitraz resistant in the Varroa mite populations for some larger scale Alabama beekeepers. So Bruce was kind enough to let me come down and sample 10 of his colonies. And so we're just going to talk about the results of what we found from that today.
Well, I think I'd encourage everyone to go back and watch that video. I'll put a link to that video down below so maybe you can understand exactly what it's like. But briefly, Rogan, if you could explain the process of how you take the samples and kind of what the process is, and then we'll look at the results for a minute.
Yeah, so what we do is we go into each colony, and Bruce did a great video previously describing this, but we go in and we take generally just essentially an alcohol wash amount of bees, a half cup, roughly 300 bees, and we put that into a plastic deli container, 32-ounce cup. And what that has is it has a 1 inch by 1 inch square of Amitraz or Apivar, which has the active ingredient of Amitraz, in the bottom of it glued to the bottom. And then we put on a screened mesh lid. We flip the cup upside down and put binder clips over a weigh boat filled with Vaseline. So what happens is we leave that cup like that for 3 hours, and the mites that are susceptible to Amitraz are going to drop through that screen lid, and they're going to be collected on the tray that has Vaseline on it. Now, at the end of 3 hours, we flip the cup back over and we do an alcohol wash with those bees. Then we're looking for in that alcohol wash any other Varroa mites that we might find. And we think of those Varroa mites as Amitraz resistant mites because they didn't drop from the 3 hours. And so this is a tried and true method by Dr. Frank Rinkovich at the USDA Baton Rouge lab. And so he has done this test multiple times, and he has actually done it all over the country. And this is kind of a quick and dirty field method to tell the levels of Amitraz resistance within your colonies and within your Varroa mite populations.
I did have a quick question for you though before we move into
Mhm.
the results. One thing I was thinking about, when I've done alcohol washes in the past, I've never had numbers like we're about to see, and I wondered if, the bees sitting in the alcohol overnight, over time, if more might fall off of the bees than your typical 1 minute shake. Have you thought about that, or have you seen any results with that, or do you think that could play a role?
Yeah, so we did have these bees sitting in alcohol overnight, compared to just doing a quick alcohol wash. I don't think that that has any strong difference in my
Okay.
personal opinion. I have never seen anything like that. But I think that one thing that when you do an alcohol wash, it's really important to be taking bees from frames with open brood because that's generally where most of your mites are going to be found on those types of bees. And also, just it is important that we really stress, at least at Auburn, to be doing alcohol washes because some beekeepers like to do the powdered sugar shake, but we have found that the alcohol wash is a little bit more accurate and will help you find more mites generally than the actual powdered sugar roller shake.
Okay, man. Well, let's dive into the results. Should I go ahead and pull the chart up here? Let me pull this up. So here's the chart, and I want to, before we get into this, I want to say there's good news and bad news here, and Rogan kind of talk about what you found here with my bees and with my mites.
Yeah, so I'll just quickly take you through the data sheet to start out. So first, we kind of start out with we just have our 10 colonies, and then we have our start time. And you can see that when we're out in the field, of course, we're writing all this down, but we put down the start time on both the cups and the data sheet. And then we have 3 hours later is our end time. And so then we go into the Varroa in the tray. Now, these are the mites that actually fell down from that apivar strip, that Amitraz. These are what we think of as Amitraz susceptible mites. Then we have our Varroa in the wash. These are the mites that we got in the wash that we think of as Amitraz resistant. We have a total Varroa number. Then we actually count out the individual bees in the sample so we can get a Varroa infestation rate. And then, of course, we have our Apivar efficacy, which is the Varroa in the tray divided by the total number of Varroa. And so what we found is that if you have an Apivar efficacy above 70%, that generally means that you don't have strong resistance within your colony. If you're under that 70% threshold, you can potentially have issues where Amitraz is no longer effective within your colony and effective at killing your Varroa mite populations. Now, when we look at Bruce's results, one thing that we can notice right away is that we have really low numbers of Varroa in the wash. You can see that he does not have very many Amitraz resistant mites, only 12 total. You only have one colony that has a decent amount, and it's still under that, or still over that 70% threshold. The other thing that we're going to notice with some of Bruce's colonies is that he does have quite a few Varroa mites. And so in total, you have an average infestation rate of 8.6%. And so while this is relatively high, it's not the end of the world, of course, because Bruce can go in, and we know from these results that he can provide something like an Apivar application after he pulls his honey. And that's hopefully going to give him some proper mite knockdown, and it's going to knock that Varroa infestation rate percentage down. And so then he's going to be more kind of in a proper spot for going into winter.
Yeah, a couple of things I learned from the study was, first of all, that I did have what I would consider to be an infestation. I've never had numbers like that when I've washed before, and that's why I was a little concerned about the numbers being so high. I will say that one thing I've done in the past, it seems I thought it was effective. I've used alcohol a few times, not a lot. I've used the Dawn dishwashing method. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, and maybe I need to actually use alcohol and just see what happens. But what are your thoughts on that? Have you heard about the different techniques, and have you tried the different techniques?
Yeah, so it's interesting actually. Dr. Rinkovich, who's actually on my committee, he came and visited our lab, and we kind of showed all the alcohol stuff, and he told me, "Why are you using alcohol? You can get away with dish soap. It's way
Yeah, yeah,
cheaper." So that is a registered scientist that's telling me that the Dawn
great.
dish soap method is equivalent essentially and much cheaper than the alcohol wash. So I would
Okay.
have no issues with doing the dish soap method. I don't think that is a large difference.
Yeah, I believe part of the problem in this particular bee yard is that I treated last year. I treated with Apivar, but I'm not sure if I treated this yard. It was kind of a brand new yard at the time. I'm not sure what I did. I do know I hit them with oxalic acid hard through the winter, but I haven't treated these bees at all since probably January, February time frame, because I started pulling out splits and just going crazy with the beekeeping season, which can happen. And so, once we started stacking honey supers, of course, you don't want to use Apivar then. And it's good to mix up your treatments a little bit as well. So I'm not surprised I have some mice. I am surprised, I think the highest one with these glasses, it's hard for me to see, was 52. And then I had one that was over 40 and several in the teens, 20s. And the bad news is I have a mite infestation. The good news is you found it for me. Other good news is that the Apivar is effective against these mites, and that one wash that had 52 in it, it knocked it out 100%, which I thought was amazing. So that's pretty cool. So what we did, just to kind of address this, Rogan, to kind of follow up with you on this, is we pulled honey this past weekend, and we immediately dropped strips in these colonies as we pulled the honey. And so hopefully, we're well on the way to getting these mites under control.
Yeah, and that's one thing that we found is really interesting because I'm originally from Kansas, and so up there, while it gets hot, you have a little bit more of a temperature window for things like formic pro or formic acid treatments. Whereas in Alabama, you have very limited times where you can use certain treatments that need that really finite temperature window. And what we've found kind of working with some of our stuff is that Amitraz is one of the most effective treatments at getting those mites knocked down and actually decreasing your Varroa infestation rates. The problem is that you can't rely on that, of course, as your only treatment. But obviously, with the things that you've been doing with your oxalic acid treatments that you've been doing over winter, they've really been helping to mitigate that you're not only relying solely on Amitraz. And that's being shown within these results that you don't have an Amitraz resistance problem, which is really good beekeeping by you, of course.
Well, I don't know about that. I'm just excited that I can use the Apivar because that is honestly my favorite treatment. I know it's expensive, but man, if if I can spend, if I put 2 strips, it's what, $7, three, let's say $10 to $12 on a colony. But if I could spend that and save a colony that's worth $1,000 or more by the time you pull the honey off each year, it's worth the investment in my opinion. And some people say, "Oh my gosh, that stuff's so expensive," and it is. But man, if you can save, even a couple of colonies, it more than pays for all the Apivar strips that I purchase each year. And so, let's go ahead. Anything else you want to say about the chart here, Rogan?
No, I think that it's pretty much covered and everything. So yeah, I think we're good to go.
Okay. Just to move on, a couple more thoughts that you might have about treating for mites. How often do you use the Apivar? And secondly, what have you found here in this area, here in the southeastern Alabama, to be effective treatments? Besides that, maybe discuss briefly your experience with, Apigard, Formic Pro, and also the oxalic acid and different variations of that.
Yeah, of course. So this is something that we at Auburn are really interested in helping out the Alabama beekeepers with what are the treatments that they can use for Varroa mites. So something that we do at the Auburn Bee Lab personally is that we do use Apivar usually about once a year is what we try to do. And so we don't try to rely on that, of course, as our only treatment. But what I've found kind of talking around with a lot of different beekeepers is that a lot of beekeepers have been doing oxalic acid, either vaporization or dribble in late December or early January. And if you look on our Auburn Bee Lab website at our brood monitoring chart, it actually shows the levels of capped brood within Alabama at a couple different areas. And that's been really cool to see that when you do hit those points in late December, early January, those are your lowest points of capped brood area. So most of those mites are going to be out kind of in their dispersal phase, out actually feeding on adult bees. And that's when those oxalic acid treatments are going to be extremely effective. And so, talking with some of these beekeepers that have had really low levels of resistance, is I've heard a really common theme of, yeah, I use oxalic acid vaporization, or I do an OA dribble, and I always do it a couple of the times in December or January. And so that's been proving to me that OA is still a viable, very good treatment in Alabama when used at the proper time when you have low periods of capped brood. I recently did a study using OA vaporization at 2 grams per brood box, and they were double deeps, so 4 grams total. But I did it in September, and what we found was late September and then early October were my treatment windows. What we found is we had too much capped brood area, and that those treatments weren't effective at that time. Actually, at that time, the most effective treatments were Formic Pro, HopGuard, and Apivar, of course. Now, when you're talking about Formic Pro, is I did experience some queen loss within those colonies. And so the issue with that is that going into fall, I don't recommend Formic Pro to Alabama beekeepers because you do have the potential to have some of those queen losses. I would reserve Formic Pro more for the spring because even using it in the proper temperature window, which we did at the end of September and early October, we still experienced queen losses in about a third of the colonies within that treatment group. And so I recommend and say that Formic Pro is still a very good treatment to use in the spring because losing a queen in the spring is much less detrimental, of course, than losing one in the fall. So our windows is we usually at the Auburn Bee Lab, we generally do a treatment right after we pull honey, similar to you. That's either Apigard or Amitraz with Apivar. And then we really try to do that oxalic acid in December or early January when we have those low points of capped brood. And that's going to be able to help us get through into the spring. And then we will sometimes either do HopGuard or Formic Pro in the spring if we still have relatively high mite loads.
When it comes to the oxalic acid vapor, I know there have been some studies done in the University of Florida with Cameron Jack. You're probably familiar with those. What type of frequency do you typically use? I think he found it to be effective if you use it every 5 to 7 days for a sequence of 4 treatments. What type of frequency do you typically use when you use the OAV?
So we usually only do it once or twice generally. when we're doing it at those really low capped brood points, because we know that if you can do it one or two times, that you're still getting a pretty good mite drop. He's doing a lot of his studies, of course, in Florida, which has more capped brood area year round. So you need that little bit more of a frequency. And so with my recent study in September, I did that relatively based off his studies, which I did 2 grams per brood box, and I did 3 treatments 7 days apart. I didn't get great results. I think there potentially could be some differences between doing it in double deeps compared to singles, which of course they only manage in single boxes down in Florida. So it is interesting to see his results, and I've been speaking with him, and I would like to speak with him a little bit more, kind of going into my results from my recent study, because there were some interesting ones that aren't as easily explained. But he's been getting those really great results of 3 to 4 times at 4 grams per brood box down in Florida. So it is really interesting to see kind of some of the differences between his results and what we've been experiencing up in Auburn.
And that's good stuff. That might be an interesting collaboration between you guys. Maybe I'll see if I can invite him on and we could have a little chat here. That'll be fun. Just a quick thing you talked about, and I think some really good information about the Formic Pro. Of course, you talked about Apivar and your thoughts about OAV. But you didn't talk a lot about the Apigard and treatments then. I know in the summertime here it's extremely hot and humid. And my experience, I've used Apigard once and I didn't love it. I used it in October. It may have been a little late in the season because it's a little harsh as well. Tell us briefly what you guys do with the Apigard. When you apply it, if you apply it in the summertime, how do you apply it, and what has been the effectiveness of using Apigard?
So Avogard's been fairly effective for us, and we usually do half dosages when we do it. So we do 2 half dosages of about 7 to 10 days apart. So we generally put the colony up on. We have different migratory lids, and we put kind of shims in there. But yeah, so we put shims in, and generally what we do then is we do those half dosages kind of on that little tray that they give you, and so we do 2 sets of half dosages. And we found that it's fairly effective at providing some level of mite knockdown. We do experience some brood kill, though. So that is one issue, that we don't see a lot of queen loss, but we do have some brood kill. So that's not the worst thing ever in July in Alabama, because you kind of go into somewhat of a summer dearth where there's not a lot of things blooming. And so you don't need as many bees for your colony. And so we don't experience too much colony loss from anything like that, but we do have some knockdown in population due to the Apigard.
Great stuff, man. I really appreciate you coming on this morning. Do you have any final thoughts and summary of anything you'd like to share with us?
No, I just want to say we really appreciate at Auburn all of the beekeepers that are willing to work with us. And we have a great community of beekeepers in Alabama. And so I've been really fortunate through my time here at Auburn so far to be able to Amitraz resistant sample some of these beekeepers. And it's just been really great to kind of get ingrained and learn more about the process of beekeeping in Alabama, because it's different all over the country. I've been keeping bees in Kansas, Nebraska, up in North Dakota, but of course, the different places you go, it's always interesting to see the new tricks that you can learn.
We really appreciate you coming down, and you're welcome to come and test my bees anytime you want. I thought the feedback you've given me has been tremendous, and it really helped me know I needed to get the treatments in more quickly. I do still have one bee yard we haven't pulled from yet, and it'll be kind of interesting to see what the difference is between them. And I'm going to drop them in this next weekend, and so it'll be 2 weeks difference. So hopefully it's not going to put them over the edge, but we'll see what happens there. How can folks find out about your research? How can they get in touch with you?
So yeah, we have a fairly active website page that we have quite a bit of information on. We also have, I believe, an Instagram account, AUBs, and a Facebook account, as well as we're trying to start our own YouTube kind of account, which is relatively young and new, where we're posting some of our educational videos on there. So if you want to check out just AUBs, that would be where you can find all the information that kind of Auburn is putting out.
Just aubs.com, like
Mhm.
obbies, aubs.
It's AUBs is all of our accounts, and then I think you have to go through the Auburn University webpage to find us. But if you just Google search Auburn honeybees or AUBs or something, then you should be able to find it pretty easily.
Great job, man. Well, I really appreciate you coming on and spending a little time with us today. I think that folks will find this very interesting. I know I've had several people wanting to find out about the results, and so I've been just eager to share this. So I'm glad we finally were able to get together here through this chat and discuss these results. And thanks so much for coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.